Hello, and welcome to our continuing series, Pathways to Parenting Success. My name is Dr. Jan Hittleman. I'm a licensed psychologist and the director of Boulder Psychological Services. My pleasure to welcome you here this evening. I will be your host and moderator for really an important topic, developing self-esteem in your child. We appreciate our audience members for showing up. We hope that you have some great questions for our panel. And keep in mind that those of you viewing at home can ask questions of our panel live by going to our website, www.boulderpsychologicalservices.com, and clicking on the Submit Your Questions on our homepage. I want to thank our partners, the Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley Media Alliance and Channel 22 for making this possible. We have four great panelists for you this evening. We're going to hear from Jeff Kuhn to start off with, who's going to talk about what is self-esteem and how it is developed in young children. And then we'll hear from Jason Berv, who will talk about self-esteem in adolescence. Next, Harmony Barrett-Isaacs will talk about communication and praise. And finally, Ann Close will discuss parent modeling and self-esteem in adults. After our panelists have done their presentation of approximately 10 minutes each, we will start answering questions from our audience. So those of you at home, we're depending on you to ask questions, so please send them into our website. Our first panelist is Jeff Kuhn. Jeff is a licensed clinical social worker with more than 15 years of experience working with children, families, adolescents, and adults. His areas of expertise include adolescent and general mental health issues. He's trained as a cognitive behaviorist and often works with his dog in treatment. It's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Kuhn.
Welcome. So tonight I thought I would start by talking about self-esteem with a definition. I looked it up, and Webster kind of defines self-esteem as confidence and satisfaction within yourself. Self-esteem can also be seen as a collection of beliefs or feelings that we have about ourselves. Self-esteem is not about bragging about how great you are, but quietly knowing that you are valuable and that you are worthy of being loved and accepted. Children need self-esteem because it helps them hold their heads high and it helps them feel proud of themselves and their achievements. Self-esteem also gives children the courage to try new things and the power to believe in themselves. When children have confidence, they are more likely to respect themselves, which makes it easier for others to respect them. Having good esteem is also the path to making good choices. This begins with children, then it grows into teens, and then finally, hopefully, adults who have self-esteem can make better choices. If children think they are important, they are more likely to make good choices, steer away from the negative crowd, and avoid doing things that are dumb and dangerous. How we define ourselves influences our motivations, attitudes, and it also affects how we emotionally regulate. The foundation for self-esteem is laid in the early years of children when they are infants in developing attachment with their parents. When adults readily respond to a child's cries or to a child's smiles, the baby learns to be loved and valued. Children come to feel loved and accepted by being loved and accepted by the people who look after them. As young children learn to trust their parents and others who care for them, they begin to develop a sense of attachment, and then they gradually feel wanted, valued, and loved. Very young children don't necessarily see themselves as good or bad. Instead, the people around them help them develop their self-image. With young children, self-esteem refers to the extent to which they expect to be accepted and valued by the adults and peers in their lives. Children with a healthy sense of self-esteem feel that the important adults in their lives accept them, love them, would go out of their ways to protect them, and would miss them if they go missing. During these early years, a young child's esteem is largely based on their perception of how other people view them. Self-esteem is also related to a child's feeling of belonging to a group and being able to adequately function in this group. When toddlers begin preschool, for example, they're expected to control their impulses and adapt the rules of their family to the community in which they are joining. Successfully adjusting to these groups help children strengthen feelings of belonging, value, and esteem. Children with healthy esteem usually make friends easily, and tend to enjoy interacting with other people. They will usually show enthusiasm for new activities, will usually be cooperative and follow age-appropriate rules, will usually be able to control their behavior, are able to play by themselves, play with other children, and are comfortable in new social settings and often enjoy new activities and group time. These kids tend to be happy, full of energy. They usually talk to others with little or no encouragement. And kids with healthy esteem tend to smile more readily and seem to enjoy life. They also tend to have an easier time handling conflicts and resisting negative pressure, and are more realistic and generally more optimistic. When challenges arise, they are more able to work towards solutions. They're able to voice discontent without belittling themselves or belittling others. Some other things that are kind of associated with healthy esteem in children could be related around openness, honesty, acceptance, flexibility, and kind of a willingness to admit mistakes. Kids with low esteem often say things like, "I can't do anything well. I'm stupid. I'll never do good. I wish I was someone else." For these kids, challenges become sources of major anxiety and frustration. These kids can become passive, withdrawn, and depressed. A child with low esteem may not want to try new things or may have a low frustration tolerance and give up easily or wait for someone else to take over and do it for them. These kids see temporary setbacks as permanent, intolerable conditions and tend to become very pessimistic. They may walk with their heads down, avoid direct eye contact, and oftentimes don't accept compliments. Some things that parents do that often lower a child's esteem is expecting too much of their child or expecting nothing. In this area, I think balance is key. Other parents will criticize or yell at their kids in public, show no appreciation, and some parents are overprotective or neglect their kids. How parents can help. I thought I'd list some tips and some things that parents can do with their little ones that will help them build or lay the foundations for esteem. The first thing you can do is help your child feel special or appreciated. Research indicates that one of the main factors that contributes to a child developing resiliency is the presence of at least one adult who helps that child feel special and appreciated. An adult that does not ignore a child's problem, but rather focuses his energy on a child's strength is more likely to help a child develop healthy esteem. One way to do this, I think, is to set aside special time during the week alone with each of your children. During these special times, focus on your child's strengths and interests. By doing this, you give the kid a chance to relax, and then when they relax, they're more likely to show their strengths. Another thing you can do is help your child develop problem-solving and decision-making skills. High esteem is often associated with solid problem-solving skills. If your child is having difficulty with a friend, sit down with them and help them come up with ideas or ways to resolve the conflict. You can do this through discussion or through role play. When we role play, it also is a chance for kids to practice the steps in problem solving, and it also helps them understand what it takes to work through a situation. Avoid comments that are judgmental. Instead, frame comments in a more positive manner. A comment that often sounds judgmental, especially when it comes to school, would be something like, "Try harder, put more effort into it." Many children do try hard, but still have difficulty. Instead, try saying something like, "Maybe we should figure out a different approach to your learning," or "Let's look up new strategies that might help you learn better." A child seems to be less defensive when the problem is cast as strategies that must be changed rather than something wrong with your child or with your child's motivation. This approach also reinforces problem solving. Some other things you could do is provide your child with choice. Even little kids will respond to that. When we provide our kids with choice, this will minimize power struggles. These beginning choices will also help set the foundation for a feeling of control over one's life. Another thing you can do is highlight your child's strengths. Unfortunately, many youngsters view themselves in a very negative way, especially when it comes to school. Make a list of your child's strengths and find a way to reinforce these and to display them. An example would be if your child likes art or is good at art, display their art around the house and do things that kind of bring their artistic talents to the surface. Another thing you could do is provide your child an opportunity to help. Children seem to have an inborn need to help others. And I'm not talking about teenagers who tend to shy away from helping, but little kids want to help. They want to participate. So provide them an opportunity to help in a very concrete way. This will also give you a chance to bond with your child, and it will also give you a chance to help bring their talents to the surface. Remember to have realistic expectations and goals, and also be a positive role model. If you are excessively harsh on yourself or are pessimistic or unrealistic about your abilities and limitations, your child will eventually mirror that. So nurture your own esteem, and your child will have a great role model.
Thank you,
I
Jeff.
think that's it.
Appreciate that. I want to tell you about our next panelist who we're going to hear from. His name is Jason Berv. Jason is the founder of the Watershed School in Boulder. He's currently the head of school. He's been a high school teacher, was an instructor in the University of Colorado's Teacher Education and Chancellor's Leadership programs, and Jason is currently consulting with independent schools throughout the country. It's my pleasure to introduce Jason Berv.
Thank you, Jan. I think that raising adolescents with an eye towards self-esteem is a bit like flying a plane. Harder still, I think it's like flying a plane in the dark. Maybe even like flying a plane in the dark in stormy weather. If I'm to be put in the cockpit and told to land that plane, I'd be pretty anxious. But there are lots of pilots who can do this without much effort and with very little stress. During the daytime, these pilots operate by visual cues, but in the absence of those visual cues, they use something called IFR, or Instrument Flight Rules. And as you can imagine, what they're doing is not flying blind, but gathering all sorts of information from their dashboard. I think we can take a cue from these skilled pilots in figuring out how to be skillful and successful in helping our adolescents develop self-esteem. I would say the big picture is do what the pilots do. Stay calm and pay attention. So what are the instruments that we can be paying attention to as pilots? I'll say first of all, as parents, it's important to remember that you are one of several co-pilots. By the time your children reach adolescence and early adolescence, there are many folks who can contribute or sometimes undermine your child's self-esteem. It's not your job alone. I'd like to provide you some comments tonight on things that might help you in your role as a co-pilot. The first instrument we need to pay attention to on the dashboard is communication. And I think that it's often the case that parents and adolescents trying to communicate is a cross-cultural exercise. And there's some very good reasons for this. One of the most important is that in very real terms, our teens' brains are different than our own as adults. We forget sometimes that their brains are developing quite rapidly, and that what they're able to do and what they're able to focus on and what their brain naturally draws them to is often different than what our brains allow us to do. Similarly, their temporal orientation, or how they're oriented in time, is very different than adults' temporal orientation. And by that I mean that adolescents are often focused on the now. And while this is good advice that comes from many spiritual gurus, it seems that adolescents have a different version of it than that which many of us seek. But the reason this is so important to keep in mind is that if your child comes home from school and you don't bear some of these things in mind, you're likely to have ineffective communication rather than effective communication. And I'm sure many of you can think of examples when you've inquired, so how was school? And with the way our teens' brains work and their temporal orientation works, they're thinking about the last 5 minutes and the next 5 minutes. And they'll say, Instead, if you can help orient them in time and ask more specific questions about certain elements of the day, about a particular class, about lunchtime, about social interactions, and bring them back into that moment in their day, you'd be more likely to have an interaction that you'll find will lead to the development of self-esteem and will be less likely to lead to an interaction with your child that undermines self-esteem. The next instrument that we might pay attention to on the dashboard is self-expression. When young people enter adolescence, the key question that they are consumed with is, who am I? They're trying to determine for themselves who they are in this world. This is important in the development of self-esteem because, as you may recall from your own adolescence, it's a time of experimentation. It's a time to try out new things, new looks, new ideas. And if, as parents, we can find a way to support those things that we find not beyond the pale, then we allow our teens to develop a sense of self by their own means rather than just having it be chosen for them, which only delays a very necessary aspect of their self-development. Additionally, in early adolescence, young people are very much focused on fairness and justice. This can sometimes manifest in protests at home. If you're able to see those protests as very healthy development and a very healthy expression of self-expression, then you will be more likely to respond in a way that nurtures a sense of self, rather than responding very personally and seeing it as if you were speaking to another adult. A third instrument that we can pay attention to is time and how our children are using their time. The first, as Jeff mentioned earlier, is allowing choice, encouraging choice, and being okay when our children say, "I'm bored." By allowing boredom, we allow students and young people to make choices for themselves and push beyond what is all too often the case, where our overscheduled young people are not put in the position where they have to ask themselves, what would be meaningful to me now? Allowing them that opportunity certainly contributes to the development of self-esteem. Additionally, helping adolescents encounter novel experiences is a great help in the development of confidence and self-esteem. By novel experiences, I'm talking about those things that make us uncomfortable. Perhaps it's speaking on a panel as an adult. But for a young person, it's maybe finding activities that move us outside of our traditional peer group, outside of that group of friends that we routinely travel with, being of service to others, exposing ourselves to new and different cultures. These are great ways for students and young people to develop their sense of self-esteem. Additionally, I would point out that school is a major contributor to self-esteem and can sometimes be a significant factor in undermining self-esteem. As the principal of a school, I can tell you that I've seen a number of occasions where young people have entirely transformed when they found themselves in a new environment and moved from an environment that was not supportive to one that was supportive of their healthy development. So just a reminder to parents that you're not alone in this journey and that there are many options available to you in this community. Fourth instrument to pay attention to, a student's peers. Who are our young people spending time with? The operative idea here is to keep in mind the balance of freedom and responsibility. Again, as Jeff said earlier, moderation is important. If we emphasize only freedom, we're not doing our young people much of a service at all. Healthy boundaries is what they need to be developing appropriate self-esteem. By providing incremental levels of responsibility and sometimes removing responsibility and privileges, we are contributing to the development of adolescent self-esteem. Lastly, the fifth and final instrument I would suggest is that we pay attention to the indicators of health, in particular sleep and food. It's too often the case that our young people are not adequately nourished, and they're often not well rested. This can significantly affect mood and perception, as most parents can readily attest. If we're able to support adolescents by getting their fundamental needs met, it is a truism that we can then move beyond that to engaging them in some of their more psychosocial needs and the development of self-esteem. It can also help avoid a lot of arguments. When we mistake our students and young people's feistiness or lack of sleep for feistiness, I think we often head down the wrong road. So just a few tips tonight to help you as you are a co-pilot in developing your adolescent self-esteem, and to remember that even in the case of the best pilots, that sometimes when one or more of these instruments are telling you a reading that you're not that excited about, it doesn't mean you're going to crash. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Our next panelist is Harmony Barrett Isaacs. Harmony received her master's in transpersonal counseling psychology from Naropa University in 2006. She is currently a licensed professional counselor. She's worked with children, adolescents, and young adults for 10 years in agency, residential, and school settings. Harmony is now in private practice, working with adolescents, young adults, and families. She also teaches health at Catalyst High School. It's my pleasure to introduce Harmony Barrett Isaacs.
Thanks, Jan. I've thought a lot about this topic as I expect my own child coming, and how do we raise kids who are not only capable and feel good about themselves and are successful and empowered, but how do we help them find that place within themselves where they know that they're worthwhile and they know that they can come back to when they don't feel good about themselves and they don't feel good about the situation. So that real core place. And it's kind of the center of self-esteem, is that sense of worthwhileness. And in that, I've noticed what I can do in how I work with kids as a therapist and as an educator, and then how I coach parents, is really how we communicate with our kids and with the kids around us is what impacts their self-esteem, or it's a way that we can impact them, because we're only a piece of the puzzle, as Jason said. And so tonight I'm going to kind of expand on the idea of communication and how it impacts kids and teenagers' self-esteem. So the first one that I can't emphasize enough is when you're speaking to your child or a teenager, is to separate what it is that they did from who they are as a person. So there's a world of difference between saying what you did was stupid, it was a stupid choice, and saying you are stupid. It has a huge impact to just make that subtle shift in how you approach the situation. And on top of that is, instead of focusing on the end product, that you break it down and really focus on the effort and the steps that were put in to get there. And I actually witnessed this just an hour ago, I think, when I was at a coffee shop. I kind of eavesdropped on a conversation near me, and there was a woman talking to a young boy, helping him write a paper, and he got to his kind of the end product, and she said, "That's great, look what you did." Now let's look at how you got there, and pointed out each step to how he got there. And you could just see him taking that in and digesting all that, and feeling good that he had walked those steps and that he could duplicate it, that he could do that again. And oftentimes we just focus on the end product and say, good job, you did a good job with that, and move on. So focusing on the effort and the steps put in. Another thing is, actually Jan taught me this many years ago when I was working at attention homes, is to catch your kid doing something good. And it's really powerful. It's kind of that shake them out of their comfort zone, and they're they think they got caught again doing something. But to catch them doing something that you want to reinforce. They're treating their sibling nicely. They picked up their dish without being asked, and to say, stop, look what you did. And that, that moment of like, oh God, what did I do? But no, this is wonderful. Look what you did. You did this without being asked. And to reinforce it with some small gesture. But it's really a wonderful way just to kind of highlight the moment of saying, this is the right way to act, and I'm so proud of you for doing it on your own. And that reinforces their own ability to make choices like that, and then their self-esteem. So when they're making bad choices, so when you're not catching them doing something good, but they're making bad choices and they've made a mistake, how you deal with that and the consequences of that can impact their self-esteem in big ways. So if you're trying to give them a consequence and it's just coming from you, it's this outside source saying, you did this, so this is how you're going to pay, this is the consequence for it, they feel disempowered. And there's often, especially with teenagers, of like this you against me mentality, and it doesn't always look like they're hurting inside. It's often like, you're so unfair, I hate you, you did this to me. But what they're often communicating in those moments is, you think I'm a bad person. So going back to what I originally said, it communicates that you think I'm a bad person, and so therefore I feel like a bad person. And it's not about the choice necessarily. But when they're given the opportunity to help make a choice around the consequence, then they're empowered, and then they're brought into the process and can learn to make some choice around what is a fair consequence for my choices, so that they're learning how to be self-responsible and make better choices in the future. But don't expect a thank you. They're not going to thank you for your efforts in bringing them into the consequence process. Another really powerful consequence is natural consequences. They're undeniable, and you get to stay in the role as of the ally with your kid and help them work through it. So help them come back to that place of, I'm still worthwhile, I'm okay, this is the situation I'm in, but I know that I can get through it. And that with the parents' help, you can help them figure out how they're going to find those internal resources in order to get through an unpleasant situation. And that they're not alone in it, and they're also not saved from their actions. So often, parents save kids from their actions, and then from the consequences of their choices, which is a really powerful learning opportunity. Another thing is to be honest with your own feelings. Starting sentences with why, or why did you do this, or you did this, is most likely going to end up in a power struggle. I know I've been stuck in them. I'm sure all of you have been stuck in them at some point or another. And you're going to get a kid or a teen who's shut down and not engaged in any sort of dialogue about what's happening. So choose your language wisely, own your own feelings about what's happening, and approach it from that position. What just happened makes me feel this a certain way, or when you do this, this is how it impacts me, or in this situation, I need more direct communication from you. So really owning what you need as a parent and modeling how to communicate that to your kids. And then I think the final piece is just kind of to elaborate on what Jason was saying about where kids are at, where their brains are developmentally, and validating where they're at, that their experience of the dramas of school and the interactions they have with their peers and with their teachers equate to what we experience on large scale. So they're not concerned with the economic crisis. We would like them to be, but they're not really thinking about that on a day-to-day basis. But what's happening in their small world is practice for how to deal in the larger world. So validating that this is real, that they really are experiencing this, and helping them think through it in a positive way. And also realizing that especially with teenagers, they are dealing with big real-world issues. They're dealing with decisions around sex and drug use and really difficult peer cultures, and that those are big things. And so being able to validate how hard it is sometimes to be a kid and be a teenager in today's world. I think often, especially teenagers, stop talking to their parents about what's going on because they're met with advice, or when how a parent did it, and that's great, but oftentimes they just want to be listened to, that what they have to say is valid and real and important, and that they're empowered then to make good choices within those difficult situations. They're empowered to make choices around sex that are probably really difficult, but that they have the tools necessary because of your guidance to make those choices, and that they know how to replicate making choices in really difficult situations. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Harmony.
Yeah.
Our last panelist is Ann Close. Ann is a licensed clinical social worker and certified addiction counselor. Since 1990, she has worked in a variety of settings that include psychiatric hospitals, mental health centers, and justice systems. She opened her private practice in 1995 and presently works part-time for the Addiction Recovery Center. It's my pleasure to introduce Ann Close.
Welcome. Good evening. This is great. I get to go last today, and it makes my job very easy because these panelists have given us a great idea of what self-esteem is, how we get it, how we keep it, how we can help our kids get it. What I'm going to talk about is our self-esteem, because really we role model self-esteem all day long. Our kids watch us interacting in relationships, and they can see pretty easily our attitude toward ourselves and others. So one of the best things we can do as parents is role model anything we want them to do. But self-esteem is tricky for us too. The advantages that we have are that our brains have finished forming. So this is all we're going to get. But we have a lot more experience. And as our kids are watching us enjoy life and set and pursue goals and handle mistakes and failures, they're doing that, I think, often more than they're listening to us. And I think maybe you know that already. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know there. So our self-esteem also starts in childhood, just like theirs did. And that was a long time ago for most of us. And there's not a lot we can do about it. It's done. But what we can do is think about it differently. Because research shows that if we haven't processed what went on in our own childhood and adolescence that didn't work out too well, that we are really at high risk for recreating that with our own kids. So we can't change it, but we can learn to think about it differently. And it's really worth the time and effort to do that. I'm trying to think. Here's a little exercise you can do. Fold your hands. Okay, so now fold them so the other thumb is on top. Feels wrong. Yeah, that's just a habit. All that is when we started folding our hands a long, long time ago, some synapses in our brain got wired together. And so if somebody says fold your hands, we don't have to think. The brain does its thing, and there it is. And the thing is, our thoughts do the same thing. Those are physical habits, and we have thought habits. And we forget that we have choices, because all of us could just start doing it with the other thumb on top. There's no reason we have to. We have a choice. But we fall easily into habits. And our brains do this in groups of thoughts. And it's very hard to catch ourselves thinking these things. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about checking in with our own self-esteem. How secure do we really feel? How competent do we feel in the world? And if it's not so much at times, what is that about? Because I really think that self-esteem is a difficult thing to fake for any length of time. And kids, they know, they watch us. So we can change our thoughts about our childhood. We can come to think about it differently, and most of the time realize that we weren't always the one that got the family upset, or we weren't always the one that had to be perfect, or whatever. Those are a bunch of our thoughts and attitudes that go in and come up behind our behavior. So, taking a look at that, and as we grow and understand ourselves a little better, I think then we naturally just give that foundation to our children. So I think of it as a work in progress, self-esteem. And to catch ourselves when we're not happy with what we're doing, just acknowledge it. Just know that that is what we're doing. And try to figure out what thoughts are backing that up. Because all these are a bunch of synapses that got fired together that shoot through our brain. And they can really keep us stuck in believing that this is the only way to think and the only way we're ever going to be. So I came up with a list of things that you've heard a lot about what you can do with your kids. And if you can get yourself to do this, you get a twofer out of it because you feel better about yourself. But also I think the kids just absorb it. They just suck it up. So here are some things that I think if we role model these and we're okay with it, that means we're working on our self-esteem. The first one is a willingness to try new things without a guarantee of success. Pushing the envelope a little bit out of our comfort zone, taking a little higher risk, is a fun thing to do. But we can't connect it with having to succeed at it right away. So we're role modeling for our kids that we're going to jump outside the comfort zone, and it doesn't have to be a raging success. It will be what it is. Taking pride in our accomplishments. You know, all of us, I don't know, what time is it? It's like 20 to 8. All of us have done a billion things today. We've taken care of ourselves, we've gone to work, we've taken care of the kids, we've chauffeured them around. We are always doing a great deal. How many miles do you cover in a day? It's amazing the amount of miles we can just cover. So thinking about that, that's just regular. And then I think we do things on top of that that don't seem like large accomplishments, but to tune into them and to acknowledge them and tell ourselves we're doing a good job, and maybe even out loud, our kids will begin, hopefully, to do the same thing. Like, for instance, I wrote a couple things down. If we're trying to keep an exercise routine going, and we've really done it, we've gotten it done 3 times this week, say it out loud. Give yourself a star. Put it on the refrigerator. Acknowledge it, because besides all this other stuff you're doing, you are following through on a goal you set for yourself. It doesn't have to be huge. Brushing your teeth in between the dentist appointments, so next time you go, they say better things to you. I mean, it takes a while to pay off, but these are just small things that I think we should give ourselves more credit for on a regular basis. Thinking through decisions rather than just doing what all the other parents are doing. I know certainly that the kids get pressured, but so do parents, because they either got to come up with the transportation or the money or whatever, give the kids permission to go. And, you know, it's life and death. Between 12 and 18, it's life and death. Thank you for ruining my life. You know, I can't go to this, or I can't have that. So when you make decisions on your own, think them through, think them out loud. Well, you know, this is what I'd really like to have happen, and I got some choices here, and if I choose this, this, or this is what's likely to happen. And it's easier then to do it when the kids are asking us to do something for them. They're used to us. Let's see, I want this to happen, how can I get it done? Demonstrating effective problem-solving skills. We're asking them to do that all the time, so we need to do it. We're not perfect, but when we fail, it's just information. Something went wrong. So to drop back and just identify what it was that got in our way, and again, do this stuff out loud. Probably, I don't know, maybe the goal was too big, and what we need to do is cut it up, compartmentalize it, and do parts that we can succeed at. It's a great role model for kids that try to take on too much. Learn to lose graciously. Anytime that you can lose as a parent and do it graciously, it's a gift to your child. There's an awful lot of pressure on these kids all the time, every day. Be compassionate with yourself. Acknowledge that you do have wants and emotions, and they're not good or bad, right or wrong. They're valid. What we do about them is the ticket, because we can think anything we want, we can feel what we want. It's our behavior that will get us what we want or not. Notice what we're saying to ourselves. Negative self-talk. I don't know why, but we humans tend to talk to ourselves kind of negatively. And this is more of those automatic thoughts that have come from childhood, early 20s even, and they just flood our brain. We have to catch ourselves and say, what is it I'm thinking? Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel like I really can't get that done? There'll be this little dialogue up here. Thing is, we created it and we can change it. It's just a matter of catching it and rewording it. Engage in activities that we enjoy and are successful at. I don't think we have to push the envelope all the time. I think it's really important for us to enjoy, if it's music, if it's art, if it's playing tennis, really engage in these activities and enjoy yourself. Your kids will see you do that. A few nights a week, just turn the TV off and go do something that you haven't done in a long time. Find something that's as pleasurable, probably it'll turn out to be more pleasurable than TV, because we don't engage much with the TV. And when we're engaged in activities, we do. We're much more creative. So these are just a few. But I think when we find ourselves doing these things for ourselves in front of the children, one, we get a sense of what it is we're asking them to do, which I think is always helpful. And two, it's just a great role model. And three, if we're right, it'll work, and you will be happier, and you will feel better about yourself. And then just a couple more things. Am I over time?
You're fine.
I think when we're with our children, if we can remember every now and then to just enjoy them. Because I think so often we are managing so much about them. Their food, their clothing, transporting them here, getting them this, getting them that we forget that They're our kids, and we raised them, and they're really just fun to be with. And I don't think kids ever get over wanting that from a parent, which is just to be with them. It's really all they ever really want. And then, this is kind of a big one. Practice responding to situations in flexible ways. We really want our kids to do this, but how often do we role model it? Again, we can get so caught up in what we're doing, just for maintenance, that we're crunched for time and we can't divert. We got to do this or we're going to be late. So in the moment, a classic example, like when you're little and your parents got you in the high chair, your mom's running around making lunches, and everyone's got it out the door by 7 o'clock, which is insane. And somehow the cereal box goes up in the air. And you're like in this high chair, and you're watching these cute, beautiful balls of color just fly through the air and come down. I mean, kids love it. They get hysterical. And the parent has a choice at that point to join in on that or to freak out and talk about we're going to be late. It's already done. That cereal's not going back in the box. So just being in that moment, which kids, I think, really give us an opportunity to remember. Try to do that every now and then, because if we can, while the cereal's going up in the air, and for whatever is going on, think, okay, this is what I really am likely to do. What are my other choices? What do I really want to do? I think it's just a great thing to practice every now and then. And they also will they're just exposed to coming up with a more flexible approach to problems. So there it is. I think we role model a ton. And it's really a twofer. And this is one of those wise old sayings that my mother used to say to me, and I never appreciated it, but I do now. Just be yourself, dear. Besides, everybody else is taken. And I think it's true.
Thank you, Anne. Now it's your turn to submit questions for our panel. There's a lot of different ways you could do this. If you're at home, you can go online to www.boulderpsychologicalservices.com, click on the home page, submit your question, and we will receive it live here, and we'll be able to ask the panelists. So get off that couch, head towards your computer, and submit a question for us. If you're in our audience, you have index cards and pens. You can submit your questions to Lori, who's back there, and we would love to answer them for you. If you do not submit questions, we will start to verbally abuse the live audience, which I know is wrong of us, but we're desperate for questions. I also want to, on a serious note, acknowledge our audience and thank you each so much for being here. It's so scary to us every time we do our show thinking no one will show up and we'll have no one to talk to. And each time we've been very lucky. We've had a wonderful turnout in our audience, and so I really appreciate you being here tonight. And those of you at home, think about stopping by for one of our live panels. You can get the information on all of our panels on our website, boulderpsychologicalservices.com. Not just the panels that we're doing here at the BVSD boardroom, but also our workshops that we do at the Meadows Branch Library. In fact, we have a workshop coming up on December 13th entitled Supporting the Shy Teen. And this will be at the Meadows Branch Library, which is 4800 Baseline Road, behind Safeway, by Foothills and Baseline. It'll be an educational interactive workshop for parents of shy teens, and it is facilitated by the lovely Harmony Barrett-Isaacs, who's on our panel today, and the equally lovely Lori Benblatt, who is assisting in our audience. So please join us on December 13th for the Supporting the Shy Teen workshop. And those workshops as well are listed on our website. We did receive a couple of questions earlier today from our viewing audience. You might wonder how we did that. Well, I'll tell you. There's a function on the website. If you have questions for an upcoming panel, you can provide them at any time. And we will bring them with us to our talk, and we'll be asking them of our panelists. So I'm going to start with one of the questions that we received today from one of our viewers in Boulder. And she asks, what kind of role or roles do chores play in a child's play? And let me reread that. What kind of roles do chores play in a child? She added play, but I think that's all she meant. And she's talking about children that are 5 to 7 years old. So something for our panelists to think about. How do chores relate to self-esteem? Any thoughts from our illustrious panel? They're looking at me blankly at this time.
No, I do have something to say about that.
Please, Anne,
From
save
my-
us.
From my old Montessori years. And I'm not sure I quite understand the question. I'm not sure if she's asking, should they be doing chores? Or what do they get from doing them? But this is what I think. I think kids that age love to do stuff. They love to accomplish things. When chores are done, presented in a better manner, they're work that's restful. It's work that shows this kid he or she can get something done, accomplish something, and they practice. So I think it's a great thing to do with kids. If you want to work the chores into it, yeah, do it the same way. I think that you just don't make it seem like a drudge. Like, because you live here, you have to do this. And if you don't do this, we might kick you out. It's an activity that they can do that contributes to the community. And to teach them to do it well is really the ticket, I think.
I think too, developmentally, they're at a place at that age where they're just, it's kind of, how much can I do? And they're doing a lot. And so not to expect that this is a chore well done, but that they're contributing, and that they're small little things that they can do over and over and again, and kind of experience the repetition of it. And then as they get older, the emphasis on more how well are they doing that chore is important.
Any other thoughts? We have some questions from our audience. Apparently my threat was successful. I have one particularly for Jason. One of the audience members, and I'm sure many of the audience members at home as well, were wondering if you could review the 5 instruments again on the airplane dashboard. What were those?
Certainly. First is communication, and understanding that communicating with teens is often a cross-cultural exercise. Number 2 is appreciating the self-expression that adolescents are seeking. Number 3 is being creative and accepting in the way young people use time. Number 4 is thinking about who they're spending their time with and honoring that with an appropriate balance of freedom and responsibility. And number 5 is paying attention to the health of your child, primarily through sleep and food.
Thank you, Jason. I have another question that was submitted earlier from our viewing audience. And let me read that to you. How do you light a fire under a 14-year-old male who doesn't want to participate in most activities? Once the schoolwork is complete, he just wants to hibernate. He doesn't want to play outside, do family activities, practice drums, go to the gym. Even getting him to do daily self-care like showering is a battle. We give him lots of opportunities to develop. He just doesn't want to do anything. I can't believe my mom submitted this question. We put limits on video games and television so he will just sit and play with Legos. What is normal for this age? From a viewer in Longmont. Any thoughts on the part of our panel?
Frustrating. Frustrating place.
I have a thought to share. Well, there are certainly more concerning signs to be aware of and to pay attention to. I also think it's okay for us as parents to recognize that the passage of time is sometimes therapeutic in itself. And if we don't force adolescents to engage, they will move through the period that they're in now. That's the thing that's most certain in my experience with adolescents, is that they will change. It's in what direction will they change? And I think when we're faced with intransigence in teens, oftentimes our impulse is to push harder, because we think if we just push a little harder, they'll move. When in fact, they're good at that staring contest and they'll likely outstare you. And instead, to allow them that, and sometimes to even find humor or lightheartedness, and to create that space so that it's okay for that choice, whatever the choice is, as long as it's a safe one. I find that adolescents often, on their own schedule and not ours, will move through that.
Thank you, Jason. Any other thoughts from our illustrious panel? I think not. I will go.
I guess I would say, just to piggyback on that, is then our ability, parents' ability to tolerate the slowness of time, and that their stagnation is probably temporary, and they will find some fire, and that it doesn't mean that you're a bad parent because your child is seems stagnant in that moment. So tolerating your own emotions and maybe sitting with those a little bit. Powerful exercise.
Thank you, Harmony.
Yeah.
Another question from our live audience. What is the healthiest way to respond to a child who is verbally self-deprecating in a seemingly genuine way, not a call out for attention? For instance, when we hear negative self-talk like "I'm so stupid," etc., how can we reverse or halt these thoughts?
That's a good question.
How do we
I guess
help
I could
children
try to
with
tackle
negative
that one.
self-talk?
I
Jeff?
think, one thing that it brings up for me is trying to spend time with your kid. I kind of alluded to that a little bit when I was talking, in terms of finding things that they like to help draw out their strengths. And maybe you kind of do a reverse approach with that, where you try to help them see that they're more than just the words, that there's a behavior within them that can be fostered and developed, which will help them see that they have other qualities. And just trying to help them see maybe there's something they could say to themselves, like I need to change my schedule or learn more tools or find a different way to tackle the problem, whether it's school related or sports related or peer related. And teaching them to challenge their own self-talk. I think one of the tools I use with kids is helping them understand how their self-talk can define who they are. And oftentimes as parents or as peers, we can say things that are negative, which is really counterproductive, but it's really kind of part of human nature to have that kind of automatic self-talk that can be very negative. So I think part of it's paying attention as parents how we talk to our kids, but also challenging that talk and teaching kids other tools and other ways to kind of approach something that is challenging or even negative.
I would support that also. I think it has a lot to do with what Ann was describing in terms of our habits of thought. And I think that often when we can help people of any age see that our thoughts are habits of mind, and that we don't necessarily need to believe our own thinking, it's quite liberating. And so exercises that I've done with adolescents is that I've invited them to think about some thoughts that they've had that they didn't act upon. And I asked them about, well, why not? They said, well, it was just a silly thought. And I think once we can expand their notion of you don't have to believe every thought you have, that I think we can help them to break some of those habits of negative self-talk by saying, this seems like one of those that you don't need to necessarily give into.
I'd say also a good exercise is to help name that part of themselves. I've done it for myself. That says those negative things. So that gremlin or that the inner critic, coming up with a character or a name for it, so that you, with little kids too, you can help recognize when that character shows up and what do you want to do with it, and what tools do they have to fight off that evil naysayer. So, in some ways it's playing with it a little bit.
Thank you, panel. I also want to take a moment just to acknowledge our wonderful sponsors. We couldn't do this without the incredible community collaboration that we have in Boulder. And I want to just acknowledge our sponsors, the Boulder County Healthy Youth Alliance, Alicia Connors-Bauer. She's been such a great supporter to our program, helped moderate one of our panels. She's just been great. The Boulder Public Library Foundation and our strong connection with Doris Haas, community legend. She really got us started with the workshops at the Boulder Public Library. Centennial Peaks Hospital, who we really appreciate their support. In fact, one of their staff was supposed to be here tonight, but he was sick at the last minute. And I burdened Jason Berv. I talked to him this morning and said, hey, how would you like to be on a panel in a few hours? And how amazing is it how Jason did? You'd never think that he just was asked to do this today. Imagine if he had a few days to prepare. It would have been like unbelievable. I don't know. But I appreciate that, Jason. And I'm going to have the opportunity to work with Jason again tomorrow night. We're going to be working together doing a presentation of a great documentary called Race to Nowhere. It's going to be at the Boulder Theater starting at 7 p.m. and really looks at a lot of the pressures and stresses that we put our kids on through the educational systems, and definitely relates to self-esteem issues. So if you would like to join us there, you can get tickets online by going to racetonowhere.com. And this is sponsored by Watershed School. I also want to acknowledge the Parent Engagement Network. I've had the privilege of working and collaborating with the Parent Engagement Network over the last 10 years on just countless projects. And they're such a great support. They do such great work in the community. In fact, next month, our panel is going to be hosted by the Parent Engagement Network. And the title, I really feel like I need to explain it because it sounds insulting. Their title is You Twit Face. Don't get angry. The reason they call it that is it's YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm not sure anyone will understand that, but that's why they call it that. And it's really going to be all about how parents can embrace the world of technology. We have a great presenter for you. That's Jennifer Korb, who actually is the president of the Internet Safety Foundation, an employee of BVSD as well. If you want to find out more information about her organization, you can go to internetsafetycolorado.org and find out more about that. That will be Monday, January 10th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. I also want to thank the Camera, formerly the Daily Camera. I always want to call them the Daily Camera, but their name is the Camera now. They've been a consistent and incredible supporter, not just of our program, but of so many nonprofit efforts in our community. Despite the financial challenges that all newspapers are in, the Camera has been just a consistent community support for us and so many other agencies. So thank you to the Camera. I also want to acknowledge the Hope Coalition. They will be doing a presentation as well, and that will be on February 7th. And it's entitled Successfully Navigating Depression and Suicide. And you could find out more about the Hope Coalition by going to boulderhope.org, O-R-G. This is a grassroots group of community members that have been doing tireless work in our community, trying to help increase awareness about the symptoms of depression and trying to prevent suicide in our community. Finally, the Latino Advisory Board of Lafayette, we want to thank them for their support. They're actually helping us with a panel that we're doing on Monday, May 2nd, which is called How to Navigate the School System. It's actually called something in Spanish that I will not try to read because I will do poorly with that. It will actually be in Spanish, all in Spanish, and it's really to be of service to Latino families. It'll be discussion about most asked questions from Latino parents who have how to find out how to access the school system and how they can be a part of their children's education on Monday, May 2nd. So we're really looking forward to that as well. Our next question is from our studio audience. What is the best way to encourage small kids to try new things and new activities without creating a power struggle? This can always be challenging. The best way to encourage small kids to try new things and new activities without creating a power struggle, Jeff was talking about it earlier, that's an important way of developing self-esteem. But how do we do it without creating a power struggle?
I think one of the best ways is you do it with your kid. You sit down, you walk through the steps, you spend the time, you hang out with them, you teach, You make mistakes together. You do. I've discovered that there's a 3-step model that I use with kids is you teach a new skill, you give the kid an opportunity to kind of do the skill, and then you celebrate it. And that becomes an ongoing theme with me and kids I work with. So I think that's a simple approach, is you just sit down and do it with them. And I think the other piece is you provide incentives. There's a lot of research that talks about giving kids some sort of incentive, some sort of payoff at the end of doing chores, or at a way of engaging your kid to pull them out of their little ruts or out of those different places they find themselves in. I mean, just as adults, we all want incentives to go to work. We work hard for a paycheck. A lot of us wouldn't show up if there wasn't a payoff. I think the kind of same thing applies with children. As you do things with them, you encourage them, you teach them, and then there's some reward at the end.
Yeah, and I think you can follow up by giving them choices. You know, once the child has done this with you and feels safe, you can put a bunch of activities in a bowl and have the child pick one and say, okay. And it just gets them to start being more invested in the whole process of it and choosing something.
I'm now speaking directly to our TV audience. I'm waiting for your question. Please send your question to me. You simply have to go online to our website, boulderpsychologicalservices.com, and click on the Submit Your Questions on the homepage, and it will magically arrive here for our panel to answer. I do have a question from Dan from Lafayette. Dan asks, how does divorce impact self-esteem? We have a very high percentage of families, of course, about half, that are divorced. And this parent wonders, what is the effect of divorce on self-esteem?
Of the child or the parent?
I can only read the question, Ann. It is for you to interpret.
I mean, one way to look at divorce is developmentally, each kid sees divorce differently. A lot of little kids think it's their fault. Teenagers get angry about it. So it's a tough thing to answer directly, I think. There's different layers, different ways to kind of approach that. I think if your child has a solid foundation, then he's going to be able to endure whatever the trauma is in his life. And I think as parents, if we help our kids understand the process, it's not their fault, and we stay engaged with our kids, I think it'll impact their esteem on a lot less level. My experience is families who get divorced, it tends to be one parent. One parent disappears, and so children need their parents. So the missing of the dad or the mother can, I think, impact esteem on a lot of levels, because a lot of times when parents divorce, they disappear. So I think stay involved, participate in your kid's life, be part of the process, and then I think through that you'll be part of the solution. And again, it's just sitting down and talking to your kids, helping them understand the process. But it's a tough question to answer, because different levels, each age, and as adults, I think it also affects our esteem in terms of how we see ourselves. I think there's a lot of guilt and a lot of anger. And working on kind of the communication side of that is one way of processing that, opening up the lines of communication, taking responsibility for your part, and then creating a space for your kids to mourn as well, I think would be a big part of that, because divorce is a really huge loss for children. It's not part of their genetic makeup. I think they're predisposed to need and want both of their parents. So when that happens, I think it could be problematic. Sorry, I was so pessimistic, but
Well, there will be an impact. There's no avoiding the impact in that, if the divorce happened when the kid was young, it's going to impact them differently throughout the years and how they process it. Even if it happened years ago, as a teenager is going to be different than when they were 6, 7, 8 years old. So I think it's an ongoing process of working with it, and I think the modeling is so important about how parents navigate that process themselves and model respect and integrity and direct communication, not communicating through the kid. All those little things really do impact how the child digests that whole experience.
I have two other thoughts to add. One is I appreciate Jeff's point that every situation is different. The situation that I see from time to time that I think very clearly has an impact on adolescent self-esteem is when two separated or divorced parents each would like to be perceived as the preferred parent, and in so doing, I think violate some common sense principles of the balance of freedom and responsibility. And by being too permissive, for example, I think that undermines a young person's ability to really make healthy choices. And while it's painful in the moment, I think applying those firm boundaries is what adolescents need most as they're wrestling with so many of the big issues that Harmony described. I think also when it's more fresh and immediate in the lives of young people, I think that it's often it has a significant impact on their schoolwork, for example, and it's difficult when they're very focused on the change or disintegration of the family unit to be focused on other things which seem much less meaningful. And sometimes when those things are difficult or painful to talk about, and there are smoke screens put up or whatever it might be, I think other adults, other people in the child's life then respond to the declining performance and see that as the issue, when really what the child is trying to express is that there's something more important going on.
And even on a basic level, I think that the lack of consistency that happens once parents are divorced can really affect school performance, especially. But the switching back and forth, and that's the reality of a lot of families' situation. And as much consistency between the two houses that can be maintained, the better, because it's confusing, and kids having to kind of negotiate territory that they weren't really prepared to negotiate. So the parents being able to communicate with each other about how things are going to be done and what the expectations are is crucial.
I would say, I just want to clarify, and sometimes we see the reverse, where a student who's experiencing a lot of stress in their home life situation will actually apply themselves doubly or triply to their work because it's a refuge. It's a place where they feel like they can get some positive affirmation or recognition. And I think that it's much easier to miss in that case, that we're actually not helping that child develop the self-esteem because we're perhaps missing the underlying issue or question that's so still so prevalent for that young person.
Yeah, I just want to touch maybe on one more thing that kind of Harmony said around consistency. And I think even though parents divorce, they need to resolve their issues separate from their kids. So there is that consistency in parenting from home to home. And not much consistency in terms of the feel of the home, but in terms of the expectations in the home. I'm not talking about like the rooms look the same, but I'm talking you get in trouble at one home, but it's time to go to dad's. Dad holds the kid accountable, or kid gets trouble at dad's and goes back to mom. Mom holds kid accountable. So that creates a much more stable playing field, and that makes it easier for the kid to develop, I think, healthy esteem and resolve what other issues are going around him. And learning to communicate, like Harmony said, not through your child. And even though you're divorcing, you're still connected with that kid. So that's an important thing to remember. And I guess you'll always be connected. So that's a healthy part of the parenting side, I guess, that can be resolved.
Thank you, panel. Watching our show tonight, you may be thinking to yourself, boy, this would be so great for my sister to know about, or my Aunt Kay in Minnesota would so love this show. Well, it's archived on both the BVSD website, bvsd.org, and on the BoulderPsychologicalServices.com website to be watched at a later time at your or anyone else's convenience. So please let Aunt Kay know that even in Minnesota, she could watch our panel. We did just get a question. It's a little off topic, but I'm going to ask it because we're so appreciative of questions coming from our studio and home audience. Is it appropriate to take a 14-year-old to the movie tomorrow night called Race to Nowhere? He's already disillusioned with school systems, kids today, etc. Won't this make him more depressed about how things are today and encourage him? Thanks. From someone in Boulder. I defer to Jason with that question.
Thank you. The movie is rated PG-13, so I think it would be appropriate with parental accompaniment to see the film. We have had a number of other students at earlier screenings, and they've been some of our most astute question askers after the film. And I would say that every young person has a unique situation, but my experience has been that this film helps them feel less alone in some of the things that they're experiencing. And that I think that can only lead to good things.
I would agree. I think it's a great film for high school students to see. I think it's very empowering, and I think it does make them feel a little less isolated in terms of some of the challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, and I think kids know that some of the schools aren't that wonderful. And I think going to a movie like this, even though I haven't seen the movie, might help them normalize their feelings. And I work with a lot of kids who are disenfranchised by school, so I think talking about it gives them hope. I did not like high school, but I ended up going to college and to grad school, so I try to let kids know that things get better. Mm-hmm. The schools aren't perfect, but they are valuable. They do have a purpose. So any way you can get through to your kid and help them feel normal or hear their pain, more power to you.
And we will have, among our panelists, Jason will be a panelist. I have the privilege of being the moderator for the evening. We'll also have Don Stensrud, the principal from Fairview High School, and Sonny, what's Sonny's last name?
Sonny Zinn.
Sonny Zinn, who's the principal of Horizon K-8.
And Dee Coulter.
And Dee Coulter, who's a neuropsychology researcher. But enough about that. We have another question from our audience about self-esteem. Why is a teenager close to adults in terms of communication but lively with friends? Is this a self-esteem issue? This is very common that we see with teenagers, right? They don't want to talk to us old folk, but they just talk on and on with their friends. Is that a self-esteem issue? What's up with that?
Probably a developmental issue, is just going to guess. Because that's what we're wired to do at that time, is kind of turn the parental units off. It'd be okay if you handed them money on a regular basis, but don't be seen with them, you know? Because basically we're exploring who we are, what we want to be like. We meet other people, we try out a lot of different things, and this is our world. And really, we're smarter than most of the people on outside there. We're fairly invincible. And this is a wonderful time of life, really. But I would not see it as a self-esteem issue. I would say if they can't talk to anybody, then we should look at it.
I wonder if it's a parenting issue in the way you approach your child. Just a question, not an answer.
Jeff just has a little baby, so.
I only have a 9-month-old. But I do work with teenagers. But I think it does go back to one of the things I kind of talked about. Maybe it's the time and the way you talk to your kid. I mean, I get a lot of teenagers who don't want to talk to their parents, but I find a way to talk to them by meeting them on their terms. I play Legos with kids, I go hiking, walking, I do all kinds of things. So maybe change the format or change the approach. One of the best things I've discovered as a therapist is what I call the walk and talk. You don't have to look at each other, but you're doing something, it's physical, gets their brain kind of chemistry moving, and you just talk. Sometimes you start out by not talking, and eventually through boredom or silence, something comes up. So maybe change your approach and see if that changes the less talking or more talking. And as Anne said, yeah, kids don't want to talk to their parents. That's normal. My 9-month-old does, but.
Well, it's also such a unique dynamic between teenager and parent, or child and parent, and it's even as therapists, it's kind of unfair because we get to hear more of what's on the internal world of these kids, and I often ask the kids I work with, why don't you share this with your parents? This would be so helpful for them to know. And I think that it's just a complex dynamic, and they often don't. They're trying to protect their parents. They don't want parents to be disappointed in what they're thinking or what they're doing. It's with outside adults even. It's more objective, and we're not emotionally tied into what they're doing and what they're thinking. And so I think that just some recognition of how complex that relationship is. And I remember hearing a study too that by the time a kid gets to adolescence, that the actual sound of their parent's voice is so grating on their brain that they literally find ways to tune it out, because it's a sound that they can't tolerate hearing because they've heard it for so long, and then they move through it. But there's some science behind it too.
That hurts my parental self-esteem.
But you know, one
It
thing I have
happens to
discovered
everyone.
that is to write letters to your kids. Find a different way to communicate. I never text, but I text all the time now to kids.
Do you write letters to your 9-month-old?
Not yet. We color and draw.
But he still likes them.
I love him. But seriously, find other ways to communicate, whether it's through writing, through texting, through emails. I've had parents slip messages under their kids' doors. It's a great way to get your point across, because they can look at it on their own time and then they can crinkle it up and throw it away. But at least you had an opportunity to get your message out there. It works. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Some of the things I've found.
On an unrelated note, my daughter, who is now 23, when she was upset with us, she would throw notes down the stairs. And they were always really horrifically, I saved them all. And so every now and then I share them with her. Another question from the audience. Any suggested reading material? Any suggested reading material? Any books, perhaps, that we can read that would help us on this topic?
You didn't have it.
I'd like to suggest a book called Blessings of a Skinned Knee. It's a great book that talks about resilience, which in tonight's context may be a synonym for self-esteem.
Any other books?
One of the books I like is called Parenting with Love and Logic, and there's a whole series of different books and different approaches.
I would mention another book called The Magic of Encouragement by Stephanie Marston. It's an old book, but I'm an old guy. It's a great book, well worth the read.
I think any workbook you can get on cognitive behavioral therapy is a great one, because you get practice at catching thoughts and emotions and seeing how the two get connected, and how we can just kind of be thrown toward a behavior that may not be in our best interest. Fanning and McKay have had them out for a long time. It's not rocket science, really, but you can use it on your kids too a lot by asking them the right questions. What's behind that thinking?
I mean, another book I thought of, it's called How to Talk So Your Child Will Listen. I forget who the author is. And then the Bradley books are pretty good. Yes, My Teen is Crazy, and I forget his other one.
Yes, your parents are crazy.
Is that what it is? Yes, My Parents Are Crazy?
Yeah,
Something like
wrote
that.
the accompaniment.
Yeah.
Thank you, panelists. Question hot off the wire from our TV panel. I guess my cold stare paid off. This is from Boulder. As parents, we are told to choose our battles with teenagers, but if I let my son grow his hair long, I'm afraid it will hurt his self-esteem because he will be made fun of or thought to be a troublemaker, etc. He thinks growing his hair long will build his self-worth. How do I convince him how do I convince him that appearance does affect how people treat him, and maybe that's not a good choice?
Should I answer that since I have long hair?
You should show. No one realizes.
So I have
Toss
a
it
ponytail,
around,
and
yeah.
I've had long hair all my life. Give him choices. It's all about choices. The clothes don't make the man. I guess if he wants to have long hair, as long as it's clean and combed, or if he wants it to be dirty and disheveled, I guess that's his choice. And I think Harmony had mentioned this earlier. We have to learn from our consequences, or learn from our mistakes, or natural consequences. So if the kid shows up dirty and disheveled, maybe that's what he needs to do. But I guess long hair, I don't know. It's okay.
This is a teenager?
Yes.
I would let an employer or something give him that message. If it's, there's a natural consequence. If he's getting his first job and they're like, sorry, kid, dude, you can't work here with that long, messy hair. Let them be the deliverer of that message. I think it's
I mean, one other thing I like to say kind of on a serious side, it is their body, and I would have a discussion about it. And I do this all the time with kids about tattoos, piercings, hair, clothing, the way they dress. I think it's a bigger discussion in helping them really understand how the world does view them and how the world will see them. And everything has a cost. I worked with a teenager who liked to wear dresses. He was a boy. And he was always overwhelmed when people made fun of him. And I wanted him to understand that that was a conscious choice he made. And going out in the world in a dress had some consequences. Just like me with long hair, there's times people will prejudge me. But that's something I'm okay with. And I think as a parent, helping your kids see, short hair has an image or long hair has an image. And it's really what's on the inside and how we carry ourselves. And as parents, it's just a time to talk and have a bigger discussion about what does the long hair mean? What do the tattoos mean? What do the piercings mean?
Yeah, owning your choice then.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, and this is a combination of two questions from our live audience. The first is, how do peers affect a child's self-esteem? And then a similar question, is it normal for young boys, oh, wait a minute, I think that's the wrong one. I'm going to run with it. Is it normal for young boys age 4 to 5 to hit each other? Is this a self-esteem issue? How does a parent get them to stop? So really the general question about peers and self-esteem.
I'd like to chime in that I think one of the shortcomings of a traditional educational environment is that we take our young people and we put them almost exclusively with their age grade peers all day long, and then they choose to spend their free time primarily with their age grade peers. And they're, unless we actively create opportunities for them to interact with people both older and younger than themselves, then what develops, and we see the negative effects of this in the newspaper from time to time, is that you have this self-referential behavior where a 14-year-old is consulting another 14-year-old about what's right and wrong in terms of moral behavior, in terms of how to treat oneself and others. And so I think that the peer group is actually very important, but not to the extent that we want to deny students and young people the opportunity to be with their peer group, but that we not have that be their exclusive experience of their discretionary time, and that they have outlets and opportunities to get cues about moral behavior and decision making from folks who are not exclusively their own age.
Other thoughts about peers?
I think they have a huge piece to do with self-esteem. If it's shaky, they can knock it down. They can also build it up. I think it's a circumstance of life that we all face, and it can have a huge impact. I think I would, unless I go for safety. You know, if I have a concern about safety with a peer, then that's a different story. But if this is just an adolescent who I think, yeah, I wish you picked a little better friend there, I let it go and I would talk more about my child's response to it. Because that's what we do all day long. We respond to what's going out there. And we can't change that at all. We don't have control. This is where we have control, is managing it in a way that's in our best interest. And that would be probably where I would go with it. And if, your child again and again says, this is what I have to do to feel okay, might wander away from that person or not. But what matters is how they learn to respond in a way that keeps their self-esteem intact.
And you will have an expert at home that you can ask about these things. That is your child. It's amazing how we don't think about asking our kids about how they feel about themselves, what do they think about friends, how do friends make them feel. And we know that communication for parents is our most powerful tool. So think about that too. Think about having a no stress kind of conversation. The challenge I always put out to parents is try to have a conversation with your children where they're doing more of the talking than you are, which is a tough goal. Well, that brings us to a close tonight. I want to thank our panelists for volunteering their time. Thank you so much. And our wonderful live audience for being here with us. We appreciate your company. Our home audience, thank you. And our partners, the Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley Media Alliance and Channel 22. You can find out more about all of our community events by visiting our website, boulderpsychologicalservices.com. Thanks so much, and see you next time.
Hey, I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. Well, I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? And wait a while, winter time.